Yeah, why don't you tell me a little bit about your go-tos, and then I'll jump in with anything.
Okay.
Ooh.
Yeah, so getting diversity in fiber up
Yes,
is probably number one.
yes.
Not overdoing it on those foods that we already rattled off. Supplement-wise, I have 3 favorites. And I'll say this too, like, this is something that I feel like I'm going to go into like herbalist mode in a minute, but bear with me anyway. First, my 3 actual favorites tend to be some sort of like GOS supplement, whether it's something like Bimuno or Galactomune, some sort of supplement with GOS, typically is one of my number ones. PHGG is another favorite for this. And I do rather like the emulsified oregano tablets called ADP from Biotics Research. I don't use as high of a dose as some SIBO experts, namely the SIBO queen, quote unquote, Alison Seebecker. When I've seen her hydrogen sulfide protocol, I think she recommends like 5 tablets of ADP 3 times a day for the first few days. And then she drops it down to like 3 tablets of ADP for 3 times a day for like the duration of a month or so. That's way intense. Usually when I'm using ADP, I'll use like 1 or 2 tablets 3 times a day. Like getting people up to 2-3 times a day if it's like a really bad case. And maybe more often than not, I'm sticking with 1 tablet 3 times a day for most people. So in my opinion, you're just asking for trouble. You're going to do a lot of collateral damage with those doses. And frankly, it's not necessary if you do the nutritional stuff and if you add in those 2 prebiotics usually. But I do like ADP. I do think it's useful. What's interesting, and I'm going to throw shade on one of my favorite people in this space. So have you followed Jason Haberlek at all, the probiotic advisor, or have you taken any of his courses ever?
I have not taken his courses, but I've followed him. I've heard him on a few podcasts too.
Yeah, he's great. I really, really like him. But I'm still so mad at him a little bit because I kid you not, like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now, I don't even know, he wrote an article on his blog and he shared it on the internet that Codonopsis root, Dangshen, might be useful in inhibiting hydrogen sulfide producers. And I kid you not, the moment he posted that, all of my sources for Codonopsis dried up. Like, I'm having such a hard time sourcing that herb in like decent enough quality. And I swear it, ever since he wrote that article, I was like, darn it. And I don't think you usually need to do that for hydrogen sulfide, which is peculiar. But I really like Codonopsis more as like an immune regulatory herb and like kind of immune, I would say immune boosting, but not overly stimulating. And I like it for like, it kind of a little bit demulcent, a little bit moistening. But it's a lovely immune tonic. And I was using it quite a lot for that purpose. But then all of the sources dried up and now all I can find is these like whizzly old nasty roots.
Oh no.
From like some, back alley herbal supplier. So I'm kind of waiting for my normal sources to get it back. But I swear they haven't had it in like 2 years ever since this article came out. I was just like, darn it. So that's depressing. And I think Lucy Mailing mentioned that in her course, that herb. And then I think she shared a study that Korean ginseng might be useful. And I was like,
cool.
No. Like, Korean ginseng is already crazy expensive and very hard to harvest. And I just worry, like, the kind of like environmental nerd in me worries that people are going to over harvest ginseng and Codonopsis and deplete resources of those herbs because people are just like Googling or hearing a podcast like ours or seeing a post from somebody they follow. They're like, oh, now I need Codonopsis and Korean ginseng. And I'm like, no. So please don't buy those things. People like they have other value to them beyond H2S. And honestly, I've never had to use either of those for a hydrogen sulfide case before. And I've done pretty well with it so far. But yeah, so ADP, emulsified oregano, PHGG, and GOS are my 3 personally. Another one I've seen is pomegranate peel or pomegranate husk. powder can be useful. That's another Jason Haverlack thing. And I have seen that be helpful for some patients too. But I don't use it for everybody because it tastes nasty. So
nice. Yeah, I think you're right on with the theme of what I think most of the research is supporting, that like you have to feed the bugs. I think especially in hydrogen sulfide cases too, because we know that it grows, like what you were saying, in an environment that's higher saturated fat, higher sugar, and I'm missing one too. We were saying maybe sulfur, like higher sulfur foods, kind of within that mix. But yeah, I mean, we have good evidence to support that, and I think the way we view SIBO more recently, and I think we've connected on this, is like there's a small intestinal dysbiosis piece that's so huge, and I think we get so hyper focused on this idea that our small intestines is like teeming with bacteria, like that need to be killed, versus like this idea that there's an imbalance. And but I agree with you. I think some of the prebiotic approaches can be very valuable for a hydrogen sulfide producer, for sure. Building up diversity in the diet, building FODMAPs back in, can be so huge. I think you want to be a little bit careful with the fat protein intake, which again, similar to what you were saying before with taking out the saturated fat, taking out the red meat that are higher sulfur.
Or just don't overdo it.
Right, exactly.
Like, I'm not anti-red meat, but like it kind of reminds me, like, remember back when paleo was starting to really gain a lot of traction, and the whole shtick with paleo felt like, and I will say I was more on that bandwagon for a while, and I still like paleo as a template for a lot of things. And a lot of the recipes that I cook at home end up being paleo. Yeah. But then like we'll have rice or something else too that's not paleo. But like remember back then it was like kind of like the sales shtick for paleo was, hey, come over to our side. You could eat all the steak and bacon you want, baby. Yeah. And it was very much like, come over here, we have bacon. And,
and then, and to your point too, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Like, no, you're good. People were okay with eating a plate full of bacon, but we're scared to eat a half of a banana.
Yes!
Like, it's that mindset.
Or a cup of rice.
Right. Like, come on. So I agree. I mean, I think what I find so often, that's usually like the people that are coming to me, like they're a little bit too low carb, and so we work on just the fact getting carbs up usually builds the fiber back in. If you're using whole food to get you to your carb needs or whatever, that's usually going to add some fiber in, add some things in, and replace maybe some of the saturated fat that you were having instead of having the carbs. So if you were coming from more of a paleo template, that's typically, I would say, not always, but typically a little slightly low carb. Yeah. Adding in a little bit more carbs into the mix might offset some of the calories that you would get that'd be higher in saturated fats.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like with my patient who is eating a pound or two of cheese every day.
Right.
It's like, what is that a symptom of? It's a symptom that she's restricting in so many other ways, and she's not allowing herself to have any carbs, any sugar, anything. And it's like, if that person loosened up the reins a bit and gave herself permission to enjoy her food a bit, and, maybe don't go to the Cheesecake Factory and pound down a giant thing of cheesecake every day. And don't start all of your mornings with Pop-Tarts and toaster strudels necessarily. But maybe give yourself that permission to have a little bit of sugar, heaven forbid. Right. Or a little bit of, like some rice or quinoa or like a piece of toast. Like maybe you can allow yourself to have some carbs and some like root vegetables that have carbs. And it's like if you are less restricted in those other ways, then you probably won't feel the need to eat 2 pounds of cheese.
Right.
Right? Like
100%. Like that's one of the few options in the template that you're using to fill your calorie need. So it makes sense that she's getting a block of cheese, and maybe broadening out the diet a bit and not having these arbitrary rules can help you feed your body better. And I will say too, like, giving you the authority to listen to what your body's telling you, I think, so huge in those scenarios, because I think a lot of the times when you add in, you know, this weekend I had some cookies, you know, when I had some cookies, I felt totally fine. If I did that every single day, I could potentially notice an effect. So it's all about listening into how your body's responding to different things versus just trying to meet this arbitrary list of yes and no foods that might not even be relevant to your particular case.
Yeah. Well, and even like what we talked about a couple episodes ago in the food reintro episode, when you're approaching nutrition from this binary legal, illegal,
right?
Green, red, yes, no. When you have that sort of dichotomy and there's absolutely no gray zone whatsoever, then it can lead to these kind of like logical whoopsies. Like once we got talking about it, I think she realized like, oh yeah, that's not really healthy to eat a pound or 2 of cheese every day, right? And I was like, yeah, it's not so good. But like when you get caught up in yes, no, is it legal? Is it okay? Yes or no? Is it on this list? Then it kind of, I think that style of nutrition anyway, like it takes away your autonomy and your control and your decision making. And it's like, oh, I just have to follow the Whole30 and I have to follow it exactly and stick with the yes and no foods.
Right.
Or keto, like legal and illegal, whatever it might be, the lingo. So I think that's a piece of it. But it can kind of, you can have these moments where like you come back out of it and you're like, oh, yeah, why was I doing that? Huh. Right. Like, you know, and this particular woman, like, she's very smart. She's a nurse.
Right.
Like, she's very smart. She knows better, but it's like when you get kind of caught up in, you know, like listening to certain influencers who say that keto is the only way for humans to eat. End of story. Everybody needs to do keto. Or, you know, everybody needs to do coffee enemas. Or everybody needs to take this. It's like, well, but whenever I hear the words everybody needs to, I'm just like, no. Automatically I'm taking what you're saying with a huge grain of salt.
Right. Well, and I think that most of the time if you're relying on a diet like that with the good yes and no, you're inherently not trusting yourself. Yeah. And, you know, I think it takes some time and some coaching a lot of times to get that trust back. Yeah. And it's not necessarily an overnight thing, but there's light bulb moments when you work with people like, so you're eating low FODMAP, but you're 900 calories below your where you need to be. So like, let's broaden this up somehow. Like you've stacked all these diets in here, but you're not well nourished. And that makes sense, but it's just not something, it's not sexy. It's not discussed. No. Really. I mean, being in our world, like we talked about in the previous episode, it's like, we hear all day long that calories are important. Like everything low calories, awesome. So they might know like, oh, I'm not overeating, so I'm good. But, you know, if you're not nourished, it's going to have huge effects on gut function.
Hey guys, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe, ring the bell, click the like button, and leave a comment down below with the videos that you would like to see me do next. Doing all of those really helps support the channel and support my efforts in making as many videos as possible for you guys. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.